Welcome back to another episode of an unexpected podcast. Here with your usual host, myself, Rainier, coming to you guys from Honduras. We have the duo son and father coming from Boston, Matt and Evan. And last, we have the recluse Mick in London. So for today's episode, we're going to talk about competitiveness. It's kind of a subjective discussion, and we're kind of going to go over what is too competitive, what is competitive enough when it comes to events and like playing with your friends or playing at an event. We are also going to go over the groundbreaking FAQs that were just released. Make sure you stay tuned for that because it's going to be really controversial. We all know they released so much this FAQ, not really. But yeah, so stay tuned for that. As always, we're going to start the episode with a list review from one of our players. Can you guys toss that on the screen?
Yeah, I will go ahead and do that. In the meantime, while I'm getting this up, I think Mick had asked the very important question, how do I paint a figure? And maybe we can answer that while I'm getting it up here.
I
So,
did. Yeah, I'm just
start with the
trying
paintbrush, probably.
I'm just trying to figure out how to paint Druzag, and literally being on this podcast is like the only time I ever paint. So maybe you can give me some advice.
So this is Druzag the Beast Caller.
Yes.
So I mean the bats
I
are black.
well, actually, some of my bats are yellow, other ones are green.
Ooh.
My other bats are blue.
So anyway, we've got a list to review.
Okay, so let's try not to butcher this name. We have Philip Olager coming from Sweden. He says he loves the content and he is looking at chariots for a local 500 points tournament that includes Easterlings. So his leader is Rutabi, who also has one Black Dragon Cataphract with War Drum, 6 Easterling Warriors with Shield, 7 Black Dragon Warriors with Pike and Shield, and 1 Easterling Warrior with Shield, Pike, and Banner. Second warband is an Easterling Captain with Shield, 2 Warriors with Shield, and 2 Warriors with Shield and Pike. And lastly, you have a Khandish Chieftain on Chariot with 2 Khandish Horsemen. You're looking at 500 points at 23 models and 2 bows. Let's see what his comments are before we start. He's on the fence about taking this. He was thinking about running just the Dragon Host with the Emperor. If you look at our previous podcast episodes, we know that is a really strong legion, even at low points. But he wants to try the chariots, debating whether or not he should upgrade the captain to a chariot or the chariot to a king to get some extra horses. He's also considering taking some extra Easterlings and grabbing more horses to make it more of a pike block. Rutabi. Rutabi Emperor instead of Rutabi is also an idea. And he doesn't want to play awkwardly because you have the style of the pike block and the kind of cav hit and run from Khand. So my first thoughts are, when I saw that we were going to review a Khand Easterling list, I almost passed out with excitement. This is my favorite combo in the game. Not just for playstyle, but for aesthetic. It looks really, really good on the field. Now, that being said, I don't want to answer all of the questions, but I'll answer one of them. The idea of bringing more Khandish horsemen, I would say no, especially at this low of points. Now, I've played this, and I've played against lists like this, and the Khandish horsemen are really easy ways to just break the list by going for the low defense. I do like the inclusion of a chieftain instead of a king. I don't know if that'll be controversial, but at 500 points, a king does kind of get up there in prices. I would consider maybe just one warband of Easterlings with the Black Dragon Emperor and to save money by not having the captain, but I'm open for a lot of discussions. Your chariot idea, I like strategically playing with a pike block and chariots because you can have the chariots hit the flanks and kind of like engulf the opponent and like mow down the lines and stuff. Plus, they protect your flanks because chariots are kind of difficult to kill. But what do you guys think?
Well, I think you said a lot of good stuff in that, and obviously you are more experienced with the Easterling Khand alliance, so I would defer to you. But I think I personally would probably do my best to keep Rutabi in this list if I can, because I think she synergizes very well with chariots, in the fact that she can use her Master of Battle to be able to call more heroic moves and just keep the chariots moving first, which is obviously what you want to do. So I would almost, I think I might consider dropping the Easterling captain, and then maybe upgrading the chieftain to a king, or maybe not. It might also be interesting to when you're dropping the captain, say take maybe one or two more of the basic charioteers along with upgrading to the king, just to be able to take advantage of those heroic moves from Rutabi and really sort of add like that hitting factor to your list, because I feel like right now it's got the only really like strong like special gimmick it has is that one chariot, which I think can definitely get shut down. I think maybe adding, making it 2 or 3 chariots at a 500-point list would put would make your opponent a lot more worried than just having to deal with one of them. But
Yeah, I like that idea, Evan.
that's my opinion on.
I
I
like
haven't
because
really played the list.
you are seen in a sense. 500 points, in my opinion, doesn't really go well with this alliance too much competitively, because you might come against a Boromir with the White Tower. Now his only threat is the Khandish chieftain on chariot, and he can munch through the rest of the army pretty well. Rutabi's really good for movement, as Evan showed, but it will be at 500 points difficult to get the full worth, because she's not going to be like slaughtering a whole bunch of stuff.
So, I mean, I think if this list hits Boromir or the White Tower, the Khandish chieftain is dead meat. The Khandish chieftain is baggage. Rutabi can kind of hold him up because she has the 50% chance of not getting knocked down. She's got the defense 7, so he's only wounding her on 6s, and she can at least strike up against him. But Boromir the White Tower will blow through a Khandish chieftain in one turn. He'll go in, he'll win the fight, he'll spend whatever might he needs to kill him, and then move on. Especially if there's
correct me. What's the defense of the Khandish king compared to the chieftain? Are they the same?
It's
about 5, right? Oh, 6-5.
Oh, actually,
6 to 5.
yeah, because there's heavy armor on
the king is heavy armor. So that'll help him against like basic troops if he loses, but against like strength 4 heroes, they're wounding on the same thing. So
and the king has strike too, which
the king has strike,
which
help
strike in the banner for 6 inches. So if you go up against a Boromir or like a Huron or something, you strike with the king, it's gonna kill a lot of what it sees. Not Boromir, but like some low Mouth of Sauron king, you can strike up from 5 to 6 and kind of take it.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is the Khandish chieftain, if it runs into any hero that can strike, will tend to die, because it's not just going to fight the one hero that can strike, it's going to fight the one hero that can strike, and because it has a huge base, 2 or 3 of its buddies.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem too, because when I build lists with the Khandish chieftains on chariot, they're the support models that can do like a lot of damage, but they're not the main like guy. And in this list, it's kind of the main guy, and I don't think it'll be well.
I mean, the fact that this list only has 1 striker, and that's Rutabi, who's on foot, without Boromir here to enchant blades or blade wrath Rutabi, it's just I just don't see this having enough killing power, and I don't think the run over attack from 1 Khandish chieftain on chariot is gonna do it.
Now, would you agree with me by saying you can fix it either 2 ways? 1, drop the chieftain for a king, or 2, drop Rutabi for the emperor. Drop Rutabi and the captain for the emperor.
Yeah, I think that is actually the way to do it, because like if you go, I actually think the emperor is a fairly good buy at 500 points, because it's 170 points for the emperor, vice 110 for Rutabi. But if you take the emperor, you don't need the banner, so that's 25 points there. So now you're up to 135 points. and you're not spending 16 points for the Black Dragon upgrades that you've got in this list. Oh, actually, no, you are, because this isn't going to be I'm sorry, this isn't going to be a Legion. So, but still, that's 100. Basically, you're spending 35 points to upgrade Rutabi to the Emperor.
And if you drop the captain, you're saving like 20 points too.
Yeah. And then you get 18. You can get 18 guys in with this, which I think this only has 19 to begin with. And I'm wondering then if you upgrade the Khandish chieftain to a king. What's the point break to upgrade them?
It's quite a lot because the king I think is 135 and the chieftain's 85. So you're spending 50.
Spending 50. Yeah, I'm not sure the points work out on the Emperor and the king.
So the Khandish king is 125, so you're spending 40.
40, okay.
Yeah, I'm
Well,
not
it's
sure that works
interesting.
out.
Or you can like, if you want to take this list as it is and let us know what you would change if like our ideas work. Because yeah, I don't know. It's a give or take at 500.
So I took a version of this list once, and I think I took it back before the new releases came out, or like the Emperor Rutabi Borgir releases came out. And I'm trying to remember what was in this. And I also don't think it was 500 points. I think it may have been 600 points. And I think I may have taken it with Amdur. I'm wondering if Amdur would be a good add to how many points is Amdur when he's on the horse?
145.
45? Yeah.
145. So, and he has a banner effect, right?
Yeah.
So does the
So
king, if we're still taking the king.
right. But isn't the king's banner effect only for Khand?
It is. And
So it
Amber's is
hits
only for
your
Easter.
chariots and
Only
your...
for Easterlings. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
I do like though, like the Emperor at this because you have the drum and the Emperor's no slouch in combat. The
Right.
Emperor can take out quite a lot with an Elven Blade at like fight 6. And the banner and having like fight 5. Do you just still get the fight 5 Easterlings around with the
Yes, you do.
Yeah, so that's if you have that with a Khandish Chieftain Chariot, now you're not worrying, oh my gosh, my Khandish Chieftain Chariot has to like hold down the line and do so much in this game. Now you can just focus the chieftain on mowing down troops or
Yeah.
negating heroes or dehorsing something.
I mean, the downside of that is that you become kind of an eggs in one basket list with the Emperor. I mean, it's a good basket, put all your eggs in, but it is all the eggs go in his basket and you've only got 5 might.
That's true.
Unfortunately at 500 points, the real problem here is the inclusion of the Khandish chieftain on chariot. And I'm just not sure at 500 points that's the way to go. I think if this went to 600 points, and you could do like Emperor, Captain, Chieftain on Chariot, or maybe 650. Actually, at 600 points, you might, well, no. 600 points, you may be able to do Emperor, Rutabi, and Chieftain on Chariot. With a decent number of folks along with them. But at 500 points...
At 600, taking all 3 of them, you're probably averaging like 20 to 25 models, so I'm not sure about that.
So I think at 25 models, you could probably get away with it. But I think, I don't know, this is tough at 500. I mean, I really think the way to go at 500 points with the Easterling is, you take the Emperor and then you decide kind of what to bring with, whether it's Rutabi or Borgir. I don't think you want to take both. I think it may just be Emperor Rutabi at this points level, and then you just fill up their warbands. I think that's kind of the most competitive list, but it doesn't have a chariot in it, and Philip wants to bring a chariot. And I'm not sure how to get. I mean, if you were going to put a chariot in, I'm not sure this is a bad way to go.
Yeah,
I'm
because
also
you're optimizing the chariot with Rutabi, and
yeah
you have the Eastern with the might. So actually, yeah, I still
yeah
think 23 models is a little low, but I always bring 60. So.
yeah, and I mean, and one striker isn't great, and the killing power isn't great, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure there's a way to really improve it.
You're gonna have a big weakness regardless.
Yeah, exactly. If you're going to have the chariot in the list.
Can I just add? So I'm just wondering, what's your opinion about actually keeping versus removing the Easterling captain? Because that's one of the ways that you could increase your numbers. If you were to get rid of the captain, you could add more warriors to kind of Chieftain's warband.
You could. They're squishy warriors.
Yes.
Yeah, I
Um,
think if
That
I were to do
But
that,
they're still warriors. They're still
yeah.
more numbers.
yeah, and I think I don't know. I've played a list like this at the last event I played in Lancaster, and I just focused on the condition. They broke really, really easily. But I'm never a fan really of the charioteers, but I do go along with what Evan said earlier. If you do drop that warband, throw a charioteer and maybe more Khandish horsemen and more warriors for the fight for, because why not into the Khandish chieftain's chariot? Or if you want to go big, drop the Easterling captain's warband and upgrade it to a king. But no, I think you need to keep the numbers. Just throw in a charioteer if you want to drop that warband.
So how much is the Khandish chieftain on chariot?
Chief on chariot's 85.
And the Easterling captain with shield is
55.
yeah.
60?
Is he
I
60?
think he's 60. I'll double check.
Yeah. Well, I think but
He's 60.
he's 60. Okay. I'm wondering if you drop the Easterling captain and maybe put a second Khandish chieftain in.
I like that, Matt. Now you're seeing why I like Countess Chieftains, because they're kind of cheap and you
Yeah.
can toss them in. And they both have 2 might and they both have heroic march. You can
Right.
get 15 inches on the heroic march, catch up with the drum. I honestly really like that idea. You might
can
drop a
all
couple.
Yeah. You can also, by the way, if you need a couple extra points. So okay. So maybe we're focusing in on dropping the Easterling captain and changing him to a Khandish chieftain, and then taking the extra points from his warband and expand with more Khandish horsemen, which will probably drop your numbers slightly, but it'll give you 2 chariot threats rather than 1. And you just keep them, basically 1 on either side of Rutabi and hope that Rutabi gets her free heroic moves off. If you're going to stay with this particular loadout, one thing you can do is if you need a couple of extra points, you don't need 7 black dragons in Rutabi's warband, because the pikeman that stands behind Rutabi does not need fight 4. So one thing you could do if you're going to keep the current loadout is you could flip that black dragon warrior with one of the pike and shield ordinary guys in the Easterling captain's warband. And that way you'll maximize the number of files that have fight 4, because the Easterling captain doesn't need a black dragon behind him because he's already fight 4, and Rutabi doesn't need a black dragon behind her because she's fight 6.
I have another idea.
That's just a minor tweak if you want to keep this, as far as kind of like maximizing your points and still getting the right number of fight 4 files.
How many points
Just
is
a quick thing
Rutabi?
to throw in before Mick says his
Sure.
spiel. The Easterling captain is actually 55. You were correct, Rainier.
Okay.
Wow, for the first time. Can we like screenshot this? Wow. Thank you, Evan. I think you made my year.
And the
Okay,
Khandish chieftain was what, 85 if he's on a chariot?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
If I'm right, I'm 2 for 2. Holy smokes, guys.
Yeah.
Wow.
So probably
Okay.
there's a way to jigger this, especially if you're going to save 2 points off of the getting rid of one of the black dragons with Rutabi. And if you had to, you could get another 2 points and downgrade the cataphract. Is you drop the Easterling captain, get another Khandish chieftain on chariot with like 1 horseman. I think you can probably make those points work.
I have another idea.
Mhm.
Because Rainier, you really like the kings. So what if you were to actually replace Rutabi and keep the captain, keep the Australian captain, and then have two chariot kings?
Hmm.
This way you're fighting with two chariots with heroic strike, and your main block is still similar. You have less warriors in it,
Right.
but then you have two kings with additional warriors around
Yeah,
that
I just think
give you
for
more
low
of a hitting
point,
power.
for through my experience playing low points and playing against low points, the kings for 40 more points, that's 80 points. You don't get so much out of them in like a small game. I would rather have troops, to be honest, because I went against two kings and I think some other Easterling at a 600 point, and because the numbers were just too low and you had to point sink a lot into the horsemen, they broke really easily. If you just focus on the weak stuff, okay, mitigate the kings or maybe moves where they don't do so much damage and focus on the little stuff. But it's an idea, Mick. I mean, it's an idea.
I mean, okay. So look, to synthesize all of this, replacing Rutabi and the captain with the Emperor is a way to go. It creates kind of a different dynamic with the list. You're going to have a much tougher killer. You're going to have fight five guys and a banner all over the place, but you're going to be eggs in one basket and you're only going to have 5 might. You could replace the Easterling captain with another Khandish chieftain on chariot, maybe a Khandish horseman. Gives you 2 chariots, but your only striker is Rutabi, so that's still a bit of a problem. You could stay with what you have now, just rejigger your black dragons around a little bit to make them slightly more efficient. It'll probably work, but Rutabi is your only striker. Or I think you could go with Mick's idea, which I actually kind of like. So it's also not a perfect solution, as Rainier pointed out. But then you have 2 striking chariots, and then basically just kind of a captain with a pike block to kind of sit in the middle, and that's the anvil to the hammer. I mean, that also has kind of 2 problems, because I think that's probably going to be low on figure count by the time you're done. But all of these are ideas, are ways to keep the chariot. I think if you're just concerned with competitiveness, I think you want to ditch the chariot and you go Rutabi Emperor at 500 points.
Yeah.
But if you really want the chariot, there's a number of different ways you can play that, all of which probably will be less efficient than Rutabi Emperor, but that's your call.
Yeah. So I guess that's what.
Basically play the Emperor.
Yeah, the Emperor's really good.
Yeah.
We're all kind of
look,
shocked they weren't changing the FAQ.
Yeah, I mean, because look, I mean, if you go Rutabi Emperor, then you get all sorts of black dragons for free, and all sorts of other stuff, and it's a power list. So
There's a line in Warhammer 40K that goes, "It is better to die for the Emperor than live for yourself." So so we could change it here to something like, "It is better to play the Emperor competitively
I wonder
than to
who
play
first said that.
Yes.
Oh, right, the
than,
Emperor.
than to play anything else for fun."
Yeah.
Okay. So there we go. Now from now we're gonna go to the segment on competitiveness. Now this is kind of an interesting thought, because some of you will probably say, can you be too competitive? Is there an idea of too competitiveness? And I know all 4 of us being competitive players who have played around the globe, we will all have different thoughts about the situation. So to play too competitively, to not play too competitively, what is a good sports, what is not? What do you guys think?
Let's start with Mick.
Right. So, in my opinion, the line gets drawn if you're deciding to start pushing the rules to your advantage and kind of almost trying to do something where you can be seen as cheating, or that isn't in like the sportsman like Like it isn't done with like the spirit of sportsmanship. So as long as you're playing fairly and as long as what you're doing is fair and honest, then I think you can play as competitive as you want. But then there is a line that some people I have seen in the past cross where um it's almost like it becomes less of a game, more of like life and death situation. Like they're really going for it to the point where like even in like the most competitive abstract way, it stops being fun for even the most competitive players. So
So can you
Can you give us an
all right.
example?
Yeah, let's go with some examples.
mm, well, it's kind of a close call, almost between being too competitive and cheating. Like for example, if you're pushing models around in such a way where like you're almost kind of displacing models and like by accident knocking them over, but like you're trying to make it look like it was an accident, but actually you knocked it to your advantage. Where you could be thinking that, oh yeah, well, this is the most optimal way that I could have moved the model, but in fact you had an intention of cheating, and you knocking over that model was there so that the model gets then placed into a better position strategically for you. Um, Another example would obviously be if you're moving up to your 6-inch maximum move and then but actually you're moving like 6.2, 6.5, and then oh, I just did it accidentally. But actually if you're doing it intentionally, and especially if you're doing it more than once, then it's kind of becoming like you're not actually being competitive, you're not actually trying to win by fair means, but it's like you're actually cheating and it's just not cool. But
So
it's,
I mean,
I
yeah,
think I think as long as you're playing within the spirit of the rules and with it and like you're still being sportsmanlike, I don't think you can necessarily go too far with competitiveness.
so that's interesting. Because you kind of used a subjective term like sportsmanlike, but I mean, so your main criteria is one I think everybody can agree on, right? If you are acting contrary to not the spirit of the rules, but the letter of the rules, you are
Mhm.
cheating,
Yes.
and that is not being competitive. That is cheating, and that is not acceptable.
Hmm.
I think everybody can do that. I guess the issue for me is because you invoked the phrase "the spirit of the rules" later on, which is different because it's subjective. I mean, everybody can know when somebody is acting outside the letter of the rules because the rules define the limit,
Sure.
right? I can move
Yeah.
6 inches. If I'm moving 6.5 inches with my infantry figure, I am outside the letter of the rules and I am cheating, and
Hmm.
everybody knows. The question is, are there any circumstances when I am acting within the letter of the rules, when I am outside the spirit of the rules, and therefore being too competitive?
I think there are. And I'll give you an
Yeah.
example of like real quick something that happened with me. I was at a tournament and I said like, okay, I'm gonna heroic strike. I mean march. And they said, you're heroic striking. And I was like, well, no, like obviously your guys are like 24 inches away. I switched up, said march instead, and they're like, no, you're gonna heroic strike because you declared that first.
Hmm.
So like in the letter of the rules, that is I'm heroic striking because I declared that first. But like that
I
would
mean,
be an example
ignoring the
of
fact that you're physically incapable of calling a heroic strike in the move phase. Um,
yeah.
yeah,
But but
that's
but but some
that's
something
definitely a
Let's
very interesting
something
yeah.
like that, or
So
like
you're
for
actually
example,
trying to
like
cheat there, Rainier. Like, come
yeah,
on,
like
like just
Yeah.
admit it.
definitely big meta. This real episodes on how to meta people.
Yeah.
No, but like something where you would say like, okay, I'm gonna heroic strike. I mean, I'm gonna heroic combat. Sorry for the confusion. And they'll be like, yeah, like you said, you're gonna heroic strike. And you're like, oh well, like obviously my guy's 3 fight higher than you. Why would I heroic strike? But the wording of it, that's what gets me. is like when those quick little rules where like they're just trying to get you based off like
Hmm.
you misspoke. We know there are a lot of like English language learners playing this game because it's a global game, but the dominant tournament language is English. That's what gets me too, is like having players from say Poland or Spain or Italy or something make a slip up and then someone be like, oh, the language you declared straight from the rules, you have to do this because this is the language you used.
Sure.
Yeah. So that's like the classic case, right, of the kind of take backsies on mistakes. And there's a spectrum there. And the example you just gave is about as far on one end of the spectrum as it's possible to imagine, where like somebody misspeaks and immediately corrects, and then the other person
Yeah.
tries to hold them to the misspeaking.
I had the situation once on like a 2,000 player Magic the Gathering tournament, and it took like 20 minutes for a judge to decide what the ruling was.
Yep.
I would never like that to happen to anybody ever
Yeah.
again.
All right. So can we get a show of hands from this podcast as to everybody who thinks that Rainier's opponent in that circumstance behaved correctly and in line with the code of conduct recently expressed in the latest edition of the rules? As expected, for those of you who are listening and not watching, none of us think that's acceptable behavior. And for any of you out there listening who think that that was acceptable behavior when somebody says in the movement phase, I'm going to heroic strike. Oh, I mean march. Holding them to calling a illegal heroic in the movement phase.
Judge.
If anybody agrees
Judge,
with
I
that,
swear I recorded.
you are wrong.
Yeah.
So
And I think it is because you go from like really small cases to really extreme cases. Like I've seen a lot of people take advantage of new players, for example, at a competitive event like Nova, and kind of lie about a scenario so they win. Or I've seen them also, a new player will do something that doesn't apply. Like, for example, someone put something up to a siege edge. This is a story they told me. And the new player after the round was like, okay, you destroyed it. Let me take it off. The competitive player knew exactly that's not how the rules work. I have to destroy it. You can't just I tag something and take it off. But they didn't say something about it, and they allowed the new player to make those kind of decisions that disfavored them. That's kind of
So,
also subjective, I guess. But it's like I don't know.
yeah, all right.
okay,
So
so
that's a
there's another
different
example I have.
circumstance. Yeah, hang on one second, because
Yeah.
that's a different circumstance you just raised, Rainier, which is someone is making a mistake. You know they are making the mistake, and you don't correct them. I want to put a pin on that and set it aside, because that's kind of a different discussion.
It's a
I want
huge spectrum for that, like a huge
yeah,
spectrum for that.
I want to go back to the somebody has made a mistake and attempts to correct it situation, which was the
Hmm.
first one. And I want to pose a different hypothetical, which is someone is in the middle of a movement phase, and it may be maybe a new player, may not be, and that may or may not be relevant. And they cast a spell like, say, Fury, and they say, "Oh, I want to channel that," while they're moving the figure. Okay or not okay?
I'd say that's okay.
I would say it's okay. Well, when I play really competitively, I start out with how competitive do you want to be in the game? Do you want me to use the exact language by the rules, or do you want both of us to give each other the benefit of the doubt? And I do
Right.
that even in the move phase where like with a competitive player, hey, my intention right now is to be more than 6 inches away from your characters. Maybe they happen to be 5 3/4. The player would then be like, oh, they're actually 5 3/4 later in the game. Okay, let me take him back if that's okay. But we agreed on that beforehand. Same with another player. I could be like, hey, did you realize I'm within charge range of this? And I know you didn't do this on purpose. The intention, like in the beginning of the game where we talked about, oh yeah, I'm sorry, like or not. So I don't know.
So, I mean, to go back to the original hypothetical, right? So somebody has missed the opportunity to call a channel and then wants to call a channel. Um, yeah, so this is one of the ones that's kind of on the edge for me, and it really matters whether the player knows what they're doing or not. And the reason is, for me, in some circumstances that would have changed how the game was played. Like, for example, if somebody is going to cast like compel or transfix and then says at that point, oh, I'm going to channel this. Had I
Yeah,
known
no.
that he was going to, I mean, Fury is kind of a different question, because really, if somebody's going to channel Fury, I'm probably not going
That's
to
actually
call
an
her.
active mistake that they're making.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
actually,
I'm not
actually
going
let
to
them
call
make
her.
it.
I'm not going to call a heroic move to try and stop that. But if it's like a heroic channeler, or I'm sorry, a heroic compeller, or a channel compel or channel transfix, there are certain circumstances under which I might then respond with a heroic move to try and go first
Sure.
and interfere with that caster. I mean, what I typically do in that circumstance when somebody says they're going to channel later, or but this often comes up also with March, like when you're 24 inches away and somebody goes, "Oh, I'm going to call a March," and they do it in your move phase after you've already gone. What I will usually do in that circumstance is, I'll remind the player that they need to call at the beginning of the phase. I'll tell them why, because in certain circumstances, your declaring that particular heroic will cause a reaction from me, and how I'm going to do it. But I'm going to say, look, in this circumstance, that doesn't matter right now. So go ahead and do it. Just remember it when we're playing the game.
Mm.
So I mean, that's how I do it in those circumstances.
Yeah, I realize both of them, like it's important to have that dialogue with your opponent, regardless of you know them or you don't know it, like set precedents for the game to where you guys don't come up with a really, really juicy situation and be like, well, I want to do this and I don't. It's like set the tone in the beginning of the game, I'd suggest.
Yeah. I mean, that differs from the example you gave where you're like, I'm going to heroic strike. Oh, I mean, March. Nothing's
Mm.
changed, right? I mean, the other guy still has all the options to react to your March that he had back when you said heroic strike. And the game hasn't changed, as opposed to the situation where, like, water has passed under the bridge. And
Mm.
you're in a certain circumstance where toothpaste can't be put back in the tube without kind of modifying everybody's moves and stuff like that. Um, I guess for me, that's the criteria in those mistake circumstances. Is this something where we can effectively unwind it and correct your mistake? And if we can unwind it and correct your mistake, and then I get all the opportunities to react, nobody's rolled any dice that have changed the effect of the game, then that's fine with me. If on the other hand, you know, stuff has happened where I've made decisions based on their mistake, then I think you're legitimately in a position where you can say it's too late. With the caveat that if you're playing with an inexperienced player, you should definitely push this line as far as possible to, because they're going to make mistakes. And if they feel that they're playing in a game where somebody's just going to call gotcha whenever they make a mistake, then that's not, they're not having fun, and they're not going to come back, and that's not what we want.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's go to the other circumstance that you just raised, Rainier, which, geez, I've now forgotten. What was the circumstance?
I think one was bending the rules against
No,
a
not all right. So not
No,
bending the
I
rules,
think it
right?
was the
That's
I
cheating.
think it was the I forgot sort of thing, or like the not reminding people
Oh,
about
yes. Basically not, yeah. So this is that the other player doesn't know the rule and how it's working, and you basically allow him to make a mistake.
yeah.
I'm interested to get
Mm.
people's thoughts on that, because
So
that's
there is a
another one.
specific example for that, like heroes calling a heroic move and then declaring with me or not. Because a very common thing among less experienced players is that the assumption is there that you always call with me unless you declare not to. And
I mean,
so,
that's how I assume it too. I think generally people will go, okay, I'm calling a heroic move, and then they move their models. And
Yeah,
then if they don't want to call with me, they will
they will.
specifically state, okay, I am
Yes.
not calling with me in this instant. And
However,
I
strictly
think it
reading the
would be
rules is
kind
the
of a
opposite.
low blow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially
Yeah,
reading the rules. And we're talking, I've seen a lot of players try that,
Yeah.
try to bend the rules and strictly read the rules. That's where it gets kind of interesting. What are your all's thoughts on that?
So that's the thing. So I had a situation specifically at the ETC a few years ago where arguably I won the game because I called my opponent on not calling with me after he moved with his Witch King and Fell Beast. And in that specific situation, it was, I think, top or second table on like a big, very, very competitive event. And I was playing against a very experienced player. And so we both agreed that it was fine afterwards. And like he saw that it was a mistake and he sort of admitted that like, yeah, that's fine because he didn't declare. But in any other circumstances, I would say always check and always allow it because like you can't assume that everybody knows every single rule. So always check what they want to do. And I would normally just go, okay, are you calling with me? Sure. Okay, up your models. It's fine.
Yeah,
I mean,
I mean, I have to
I
say,
would
and go ahead. I'm sorry.
I would never pull that on anyone ever. I don't think. I would never say, "Oh, you didn't call with me, so you can't move people." I get that, like, that's it's sort of it's a similar thing with, like, where you've got a model with like Burly and two-handed, and they've also got a single-handed sword, and then they don't specifically declare that they're going two-handed. So you go, oh well, you didn't declare that you're going two-handed, so you don't get the +1. It feels like that sort of thing where it's just like semantics for the purpose of semantics when everybody knows sort of what you were intending to do or what you were doing. So I personally wouldn't call people on it. A lot of times I won't say that I'm declaring with me because my
With
opponent
me is the
knows I'm
decfault.
declaring with me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
it's
know
the
I'm
default.
declaring with
Yeah.
me. Um,
Yep.
so like if someone tried to pull that on me, and especially if they succeeded, I would probably be pretty salty about that. And I think it would definitely decrease my play experience to know that like my opponent is going that deep. But I mean, I guess if that's fine with both you and your opponent,
Yeah.
then you can
Yeah,
call it
I
like
think it
that.
was in that specific circumstance that we were both fine with that, but generally, like the assumption should be there that it's always with me unless somebody says it isn't.
Right. I mean, the only circumstance I think being persnickety over with me is important is if somebody has moved the figure without, in a circumstance, where it's, there's a legitimate strategy either way, right? And they've moved the figure, and then it is not clear who was within the 6-inch radius and who was not.
Sure.
And I think the solution in that circumstance is, look, if you fail to call with me and we didn't measure who's within and who's without, then all ambiguity goes to the other player, right? If it's to your disadvantage for that extra guy to be in and we don't know at this point, then he's in. If it's to your disadvantage for him to be out, then he's out. And because you
Yeah,
failed to measure.
it is hard. And I like how Mick kind of mentioned though, like the rankings of where you play. Like I feel like that event is probably one of the most competitive in the world. If you us in the States, we have Nova. It's actually not, it's competitive, but it's not like extremely competitive. But besides that, we have a lot of like themed build your community, get people in the game kind of events. And like if you saw that at like one of our tournaments, we would just be like, whoa, like I don't know, man. I don't know. Like Billy, who you're playing against, has only played the game once and he's playing like the Dead
Right.
Legion. Like I don't know, you're gonna make it bad for Billy.
Yeah. So here's another twist on that, right? And this I think has implications. The code of conduct in the new set of rules now states that you have an obligation to point out rules to your opponents, even when pointing out those rules is not in your favor.
Mhm.
And in your circumstance, Mick, it's not clear that that counts because, it's not clear that he forgot the rule to you, right? I mean, he could have been intending just to not call with me.
Clearly,
But
yeah.
there are circumstances where that's not true, right? Like
Yeah.
banners. Banners are the clearest circumstance where I think this new code of conduct applies. If your opponent is within banner range and he is forgetting that,
Just remind them.
I think you are now obligated to tell them that figure is within banner range. You need to reroll. That is how I've been interpreting it.
Yeah, that's also the way that like I've been playing it. I think everybody I always played against played the same way, that like you just remind yourself about banners.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't. I mean that, or at least that's not how it was played. Generally, I will remind other players. Certainly, I will remind other players unless they're like top tier competitors. But I think because I know I have forgotten banners many times, and people have not reminded me. But I think now there is an obligation that if there's something that creates a reroll or gives a +1 or something like that, and it's not a tactical decision, right? There's no reason not to give the +1. Your opponent is not thinking, I'm going to make a conscious decision not to do the +1. You are obligated to remind your opponent, no, my model's dead because he got a +1.
I think victory points too, you're obligated to remind your opponent of the victory points they get. Because in the States, there's like a lot of scenarios and people don't really get them when they're first starting. And I've seen players when you're going over the end game, okay, like I got this many victory points on the scenario because of this. And the opponent might say, oh, I got this many victory points because of this. And they're missing an aspect of it where they lose like 2 or 3 victory points. And the opponent, knowing that they don't know it, are like, okay, that's fine. That's fine. I know that
Yeah,
controversy
but
has come up.
that's like straight up cheating.
It's come up before, though. Like it's
So yes and no, right? Because I I have undercut myself because I just kind of went through the victory points quickly with my opponent and realized that and forgot that I get I mean, I can't remember what it was. I forgot I got 1 point for some, because I also had, we each got like 1 point extra because we each had banners at the end or something like that. And you just don't necessarily think about that. And look, sometimes, especially if we're going quickly, we're going to forget stuff.
Mhm.
yeah.
And I mean, I don't want to jump down people's throat and make assumptions that just because people play a lot, they're never going to make mistakes in this, because we do. Which is why I've started, when we're doing victory points, somebody will say, well, all right, this is a 10-0 to me, right? Or a 10-0 to you, right? I'm going to say, no, we're going to get out the book and we're going to walk through
count it.
every one of these. And, I don't care how sure we are of the outcome, we're going to do this anyway. And I think that's really how you ought to do it, because, if, A, you don't want to make a mistake, and B, especially if you're a competitive player, you don't want to be blamed for making an intentional mistake when you actually made an honest mistake. And the way to avoid that is when you're done with the game, you whip out the book and you go through every victory point and make sure it's properly allocated, regardless of circumstance, regardless of how sure you are that you're right. So,
Sure, that makes sense.
but yeah, so, but there was another circumstance that somebody, and I think it was you raised earlier, Rainier, or maybe it was Mick. And this is one that's definitely a gray line for me. And this is when someone is making a tactical mistake. I mean, there is this classic, I can't remember who said it, but there's this classic phrasing from military history, and I don't know whether this was Napoleon or somebody else, who said, never interrupt an opponent when they're making a mistake. And you end up in these situations where someone is making a tactical mistake, and it may be because they misunderstand the rules or they've forgotten a rule or whatever. And so the classic one, I'm trying to think of a classic example of this. All right, I'll throw a hypothetical.
One I've done sometimes is that sometimes my opponent will just like forget to cast spells, right?
Yes,
and like
that's
they'll
a good
move
one.
their model and they won't cast the spell, And depending on, how the game's going, like how competitive the game is, I will either I will just like say absolutely nothing and go, oh, okay, you didn't cast a spell, moving on, or I will remind them and ask, are you going to cast a spell this turn? What do you want to do anything else with them? Those sorts of things, just to sort of like, because if they're a new player, just to jog their memory and remind them that yes, you do have spells that you can use.
And
So
by the way, one of his opponents who forgets to cast spells is me.
Devin. Oh, and you. Yes,
Yeah.
you and Devin. I have reminded multiple times in not tournament games, but practice games, like, are you casting spells with this
Yep.
model? Um, and most of the times it's, oh God, right. Yeah, I'm definitely doing that.
Yeah.
It will
Yeah.
it
So
will
that,
definitely become relevant later today when we talk about one of the FAQs.
yeah. But yeah, that's a great example, right? So that's a circumstance where somebody is not kind of misapplying a rule, and you can, he's misapplying it, and you can correct him, and even if it's against you to do so.
Yeah,
But
or the basic like they leave a flank kind of out and you can like heroic combat into it and then like kill their Denethor or like kill their like legless or something through the combat and stuff. Like
yeah,
stuff like that I don't think is like you don't need to explain one by one, oh, it'd be better if you do this, actually it'd be better if you do that. Don't do this because this will mess you up. You're not teaching someone the game. But I think those one things like maybe a player's playing Lothlorien with shield and they think they're defense 5 and they're defense 6 and they're taking their models off as if they're defense 5. Like I think you're obligated to be like, actually no, you're newer to the game or you just don't realize your Lothlorien like Gladrim, they're actually defense 6, so I'm not killing them. Something like that's more
yeah.
applicable.
And by the way, I think that falls. I think you are now obligated to do that regardless of player skill because of the, you must correct an opponent's errors in the rules, even when it's not in your favor to do so.
Yeah, but it's an
But
error in the rule, not the error in tactics.
yeah, not
I,
an
I
error in
like I like I
tactics.
like how I like that how you phrase that though, Matt, though. Like you're supposed to correct the error of your opponent even when it's in your favor. I think that phrase kind of like knocks it right on the nose for me.
Yep. Um, so but but yeah, I mean the forgetting to cast the spells. Another one that I see a lot is people who do not heroic strike in circumstances where it's suicidal and not heroic strike. And I think you need to make a call there in your head as to is this a circumstance where we're going to take this as a teaching moment, and you're going to provide tactical advice to your opponent in a circumstance where obviously it's never to your advantage to give good tactical advice to an opponent. But I'm going to do this because I'm going to invest in the game, right? And this is something where this is somebody I may play again, this is somebody I want to play again, and I want them to have a good experience playing. So I'm going to tell them, look, the way you would play this game is to do it kind of this way, and he needs to strike here. And that's a circumstance where I think, look, if you're on top tables at Articon, that is not a correction you need to make, because the assumption is that if somebody gets the top tables at Articon, their tactical decisions are their own, and you're entitled to take advantage of whichever ones are bad. But if you're playing, if you're playing at the bottom tables at Articon, or it's first round at Nova, and you're playing somebody doesn't have a lot of experience or whatever, that's when you may want to think about correcting them. And and look, to their credit, a lot of people, when I tell them that, will be okay, yep, thanks for pointing that out, but you know what, I didn't call it, so let's go ahead and play the game, and I know for next time. Which, if somebody ever points that out to you, is the correct way to do that. And go from there.
So I had a situation years ago when something similar happened where my opponent made a terrible mistake, But the sort of mistake where I was like, okay, if you actually want to do this, then like I will feel bad winning. And so I just told them, can you actually do something else? Because if you do this other thing, I cannot win. But if you do this thing, then I'm probably gonna win. So I just really felt bad for such a bad mistake, and I just asked my opponent to play correctly. And then that actually like led to a really good experience afterwards, and
Yep.
good good fun after the game. And so
Yep.
yeah, I was just like, please don't do this because it's hurting me if you if you do this.
Yeah. I mean, for me at least, one way I've kind of developed to deal with this situation to kind of like allow me to sleep at night afterwards when I'm in these situations where, look, it's a legitimate competitive situation. And look, I mean, these games are won and lost by mistakes. So, capitalizing on your opponent's mistakes is part of the way you win the game. So, but when you're in a situation where somebody's making an obvious mistake and you know that they're making it, or at least you think that they're making it because they just haven't learned the game to the point that they should, is when they make the decision, you say, are you sure? And leave this pregnant pause and allow them to think about it, because that will tell them that I think that they are making a mistake without me necessarily telling them what it is. And
Yeah.
that may be a way to go when you're in a competitive situation, which is not to say that if you're playing somebody who's new to the game and they don't understand how special strikes work, and they're not calling a special or a heroic strike works, and they're not calling a heroic strike, you should just tell them, look, this is a circumstance when you want to play heroic strike. But if you're in kind of a competitive situation where it really matters who wins and who loses, but you think somebody is making a mistake there, that just because they don't know the rules to the same extent you do, then you can say, are you sure? And let them think it through. I mean, that may be a way to a middle ground there
Or
to
if you
do it.
like, because like if you're going against a super competitive player and you don't want to give away that they made a mistake, you can also ask, and I'm not saying a rules mistake, but like a deployment mistake or something that's going to go to your advantage. I always say, are you finished? Or would you like to do anything else? Like, let's say they forgot to do something that it's going to be beneficial to them. You can be like, would you like to declare anything else? Would you like to do anything else? Are you finished? Okay, now it's my turn. Because that's the clarification if you're playing a really, really competitive game, to be like, oh, no, no, no. They go, oh, I actually want to do this. You could say, like, okay, I asked, though, to clarify and stuff like that. So if you are a super competitive player, just do those clarifying questions. Yeah, but I'm also curious what people think, because we reviewed a list from Sweden. We've had guests on from Italy, like Australia, Germany, the
We
UK,
had one
mixed
from
from
Greece the other week. So
yeah. So it's like I'm actually really curious what all your different thoughts on this are, because I know like our podcast, we have a lot from all over the world, but we're kind of dominated by the East Coast meta in the United States. And I think like we, like Matt, myself, Evan, Devin, even anyone else, like we kind of have an understanding like don't do that. We don't do that here. You know what I mean? There are these unspoken rules where we're like, come on, half of the people are like new players. Let's not do that.
well, let's see if we can speak the rule, right? Because unspoken rules, while people use
Mhm.
them all the time, are not terribly helpful because you can't communicate them to other people who don't understand them. So I'm gonna put Nick on the spot first. Like, if you had to articulate what your test is between too competitive and acceptable, what would it be?
Just don't be an asshole.
All right, that's fair.
That's
Evan, what's yours?
I mean, yeah, I feel like Mick sort of hit the nail on the head there. Just don't be an a-hole. Don't don't try and bend the rules to your advantage. Give people the benefit of the doubt. And if the person is less experienced at the game, or is new to the game, then help them out. But I mean, don't let them win the game, but help them out in case they're making like some sort of very obvious mistake.
All right, Rainier.
Yeah, mine kind of goes along with all of it, but I would say don't just win games off technicalities because you're gonna lose on friends. And I always feel bad actually for those players who are kind of like socially like, we don't like that player because like it's bad for them. But you also have to think like, don't just win all your games on technicalities. Make friends, talk about it during the game, set precedents in the beginning to be like, this is my expectation of the game, how I play. What is your expectation? Let's meet in the middle. So yeah, just don't, any phrase you take home, don't win on technicalities because you'll lose friends.
Yeah. So, like, I mean, I agree with everything everybody just said. What I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and turn this into a test, like an internal test that you can use to determine if you're being an asshole or not. And in my head, it's you should be playing every game as if you're playing it against your best friend, or in my case, a family member. And if what you're going to do to your opponent is something you would not do if you were just going to be playing a pickup game against your best friend, then you shouldn't do it, right? And the reason is that at the end of the day, we're all playing a game. This is not, this is not a business deal where they're multi-million dollar stakes. This is not a sport where, um, where we're professionals and we're trying to earn money and reputation at this. This is a game, and we're playing the game to have fun. And if we're walking away from that table, wondering, well, geez, did I do the right thing? Then that's that probably wasn't fun for you. It probably wasn't fun for your opponent. And at the end of the day, we failed in what we set out to do, which was to go out and have fun. Now, look, there are going to be people who are a-holes who are listening to this who are saying, but that's the way I play against my best friend. And if that's you, I'm sorry, we can't help you. That's that, there are people in the world who are like that. But if you're kind of on the fence there and trying to figure out whether the way you play or how to react in a certain circumstance is, I mean, the test I would apply is like, look, if, is this something I would do to Evan? No, then I'm not going to do it. So, and you can kind of apply that test for yourself.
I can also just add one more thing where like pretty much, well, all of us on this podcast have won small and big tournaments. And to me, it's like at the end of the day, despite you winning everything, it's like it doesn't really matter that we won all these things. So there isn't really like it doesn't matter whether you won or lost a game or won or lost a tournament. Like
because we're all adults. We're all adults that play with toy soldiers, right?
Yeah.
None of this has real stakes. None of this matters.
None of it matters.
At the end of the day, it's you should be fine to go to a tournament and lose or play a game and lose. If you go into a game thinking to yourself, I can't lose this, something's wrong, and maybe you need to take a step back and kind of reevaluate your goals in life. You should, every time you walk up to a table, you should walk up to the table going, look, it's perfectly fine if I lose this game, and I'm still going to have a good time in doing it.
Yeah, I suppose perhaps the question you should ask yourself is, if I win this game, will I be able to put that win onto my dating profile?
Isn't the answer to that always no?
I mean, yeah. When it comes to that, Mick, like we always lose. Like, let's be honest. We all got in the game after we got married because we had a chance.
Yeah, that's right.
No, but I do want to bring it back to like the spirit of the game, and like for those new players, like the game was basically dead for a long time, and it took like the community in the UK to kind of like revise it back to become what it is right now. And I don't think it was the solely just the glory on getting technicalities of wins. I think a lot of it was like lasting friendships you made, the community you got involved with, and stuff like that. So take that into consideration.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, what's going to stay with the things that have value from playing this game are not the trophies you take home; it's the friends that you make. And if
Yeah,
you're
like
gonna,
Matt and I are, I'd argue we're like some of the top competitive players in the United States with like achievements and just playing. And one of my favorite games with him is like when we were exhausted, we had no idea what was going on. We were like pushing models forward, forgetting our rules and stuff like that. But it's because we took like the mechanics weren't the most important thing. We like knew that like this is gonna last longer or whatever.
yeah,
The real SPG is the friends you made along the way.
yep,
And
that's
the
true.
souls you crushed.
That's right.
Yes, but I know
And
a lot of competitive players are going to be watching this, being like, "No, I think that this is too soapy," and like, like make friends, like go to the bars and the pubs afterwards, and be friendship, and like let us be multicultural and like great with everybody. No, I understand some people are extremely competitive. Just don't take advantage of new players. That's my one thing.
yeah.
All right, so let's now talk about the FAQ and all of its broad changes. What do you
All of the
guys think of it?
changes. All
All of
right,
the changes, all half of the change.
let's have a look. So let's start with with the most controversial one. That's FAQ for the war in Rohan. So we scroll all the way down. In magenta, there are no changes. Okay. So
Moving right along.
moving along to Scouring of the Shire. Nothing. Okay. Next, the Quest of the Ringbearer. This is a big one. Uh, Nothing. Next up, we have the Matched Play Guide. Okay. So in the Play Guide, there is an errata. In Storm the Camp, the campsite, replace the first paragraph with the following. The campsites are the deployment areas of the two armies. A campsite is captured if at the end of the turn, if at the end of the game, you have more models entirely within your opponent's campsite than they do.
Okay.
So
So,
I always thought that was the case.
no, you
Oh,
could. Well,
entirely. Is that the change?
no, it's the if at the end of the game, because you could capture the campsite and then the other guy could
Ah,
capture it back.
yes.
I
Yes.
can't remember if there was any practical implication of that.
Yeah,
Um,
there is a bit where like people sometimes play that once they've captured it, then they basically ticked off the objective, and then they went, okay, well,
Yeah.
even if it's been captured back, I've already captured it in this game, so it
what
counts as captured.
was it that, or because I never played it that way. I played you could capture it back,
Yeah, no,
but
I've seen someone maybe on Facebook arguing about it at some point.
but
Yeah,
there
I've
was.
I've I've seen games where people would go in, storm the camp, and then they would just walk their models away, and then they would say at the end of the game that, oh yeah, I stormed the camp, so they still get the points.
Still get the points.
I feel like this was clarified at some other point that that's not how you play, but I think they're just like putting it into a more like concrete form, I guess.
Maybe.
So
The other reason it may matter is there's that rule. Well, if you're within your camp, you don't have to you automatically pass courage tests. And I wonder if people were saying, once the camp was stormed,
It's no
you
longer your
lose
camp.
that benefit. Yeah, it's no longer your camp, so
Nice.
you lose that benefit. I don't think I played it that way either. I'm just wondering whether that was an implication. But now we know it's your camp until the end of the game, and if he has more figures in it than you do, then it becomes his camp and he gets the victory points.
Sure. Cool. So moving on. We have Gondor at War with no changes. Oh yeah, actually, the designers commentary has August written on it, August 2022, which shows that there weren't any changes in February.
Mhm.
Same for the Fall of the Necromancer. Okay, Defense of the North. First update. When Grim Baron transforms into bear form, does the bear model have to be centered over the man model, or does it only need to be overlapping part of the man model? The answer is the bear model only needs to be overlapping part of the man model. So when Grim Baron transforms into a bear, The bear model must be placed so that it is not displacing any models if possible.
So I think as long as you are not displacing somebody by doing it, you can place the bear so that only an edge of it's only overlapping just the barest edge of the Grimbjorn man figure.
So
how
that
you're reading it?
effectively, yeah, effectively you gain additional
You gain a
movement from
couple
it.
inches. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can move, change into a bear, and then charge with the bear. Although,
and that solves, by the way, the inability to transform situation. Because if Grimbjorn is standing next to if there's a house immediately to Grimbjorn's left, which under the old circumstance, Grimbjorn couldn't transform because part of his model would be where the house was. He can just have the bear appear all the way to his right so he can transform.
Sure. But then in that case, do we think that means that you gain the extra movement, or are you still limited by the maximum move that
no, I think you gain the extra movement.
Which you can make. Because what's the man model's move distance? 6?
6.
And then the bear is 8. So even if you did gain the 2 extra inches, like the model has moved a maximum of 8 anyway. So
no, I don't think that it has. I think it's like dismounting, where that dismount doesn't count as movement. Like if you're on,
I believe that's correct. Yes. Because I mean, I think what you can do is you can put the base anywhere, and then you move your 8 inches from that.
Right.
It's sort of like when you turn the Mumak and you get extra inches because the base is like an oval base. So it basically gives you extra movement for free.
I was pretty sure they fixed that, because
now the Mumak's still an oval base.
Yeah, but I mean, let's say if you were dismounting a cav and then jumping into combat, you can still move a maximum of 10 from the place you started. You can't jump off and
you actually only move a maximum of 6
and then get extra.
Yeah, you can only get a maximum of 6 if you're going to dismount and move into combat, but you measure that 6 from where the dismount gets placed on the board, and the dismount can get placed on the board anywhere in contact with the mounted model. So it's actually 6
move your 10. You can also move your 10 and then dismount afterwards by placing your model in contact with the cavalry base, which will give you a little bit more movement.
Yes, but then you can't dismount into combat.
That's correct.
You cannot dismount.
If it is the 11th inch, you can't dismount into the combat. Yeah, okay.
But you can grab an objective that way.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. It's just the whole thing of dismounting into combats that used to be quite a controversial thing.
Yeah. So but you still get effectively get the extra move.
Yeah. Sure.
That you get by placing the figure on the table for free. And I think that makes sense.
That makes sense. Cool. Next one is, if Grimbjorn has to displace models when he transforms, can this force models out of combat or into combat with another model if they would end up in base contact with an enemy model? That's a no to both instances. Models that were in combat when displaced will remain in combat with the models they are engaged with. In the odd situation that a model would be displaced into base contact with an enemy model, they will not count as being in combat with that model unless they subsequently charge that model.
Okay.
So next up we have, can Grimbjorn transform into a bear before he moves onto the board in scenarios where this applies? No. In order to be able to transform, you have to be on the board. Yep. And the last one is, when using the Assault on Lothlorien Legendary Legion, do the FAQs that affect the Dark of Night special rule from the Clash by Moonlight scenario also apply to the Cover of Darkness special rule? And that's a yes.
Okay.
And that's all there is for Defense of the North.
Big changes to Grimbjorn.
Yeah.
Film at 11.
Then we are moving on to Armies of the Lord Rings. Going. Okay, here we go. Page 87, Galadrim Warrior Wargame. Replace Elven Mage Sword with Elven Mage Hand and a Half Sword. That makes sense.
Galadrim Knight.
Sorry, Galadrim Knight.
Warrior. Yes.
Galadrim Knight.
Important difference, because Squadron
100.
Warrior has that.
Yep. 141. Gothmog, Lieutenant of Sauron. Work to replace sword with mace or sword. So you get to use a mace with Gothmog. And that's all the changes. We are moving into Armies of the Hobbit. Does Jirion, Lord of Dale's Windlands, trained special rule, allow him to count as a trained crew when firing a friendly Windlands? So yes, he counts as a trained crew. Next up, we have when Baron transforms into bear form. That's the same FAQ question as before. Same again, the next one, if Baron has to displace models. And same question for Baron. Okay, then we go, can the Spider Queen use her progeny special rule whilst she's engaged in combat? No, she cannot make extra little spiders when she's fighting.
She cannot give birth while fighting.
She is trying to save herself for her life. Okay, and the final changes, that's the Middle-earth strategy battle game rules manual. Do the likes of inanimate objects such as a siege engine, demolition charge, the Mirror of Galadriel, and so on count as a model for the purpose of an army's breakpoint or for holding objectives? No, they are not warriors after all.
So now we got to look for the animate versus inanimate keywords in the models.
Yeah. What? I don't suppose there would be anything else.
Yeah.
Some special rules, such as the Goblin King's Blubbery Moss or Malbeth the Seer's Gift of Foresight, allow models to ignore wounds on a dice roll as if a point of fate had been spent. Might be used to alter such rolls. Yes. Most,
interesting. That was not how I played it.
I thought that's how it always worked.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think that's how a lot of other people played, and I think that's how I played it. So
Now,
I'm glad they clarified that.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question about
it's
that.
the same thing with Fury, right? You can modify Fury roll.
But
not that anybody does that anymore.
Right.
No, of course.
But in Lords of Battle, it says ignore wounds as if a point of fate has been spent. Do you still get that point if you try to wound them and they ignore it, but you still get that one?
I think there is a specific FAQ for Lords of Battle with that specific question being asked, and the answer was a no.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm actually, now that I'm thinking back on this, I'm not sure I've ever had anybody try and do this, because in most circumstances, people will use, they'll use the Blubbery Mass first and then use fate. And then if that doesn't work, they'll just roll fate to see if that works. But, I guess if you're out of fate, then this would come up. I'm not sure I've ever actually had this circumstance arise where somebody said, I want to use might on this. So.
Okay, moving on. If a model with a spear was supporting a hero model that declared a heroic combat, and the hero subsequently charged another enemy model whilst remaining in base contact with their original spear support, can the model with the spear support them again? No. Next one.
That makes sense.
If a model armed with a spear is engaged in a fight, and after the fight is resolved, they find themselves in base contact with another friendly model, such as if they back away, can they still spear support even though they have already been involved in a fight? No, because they've already been involved in a fight. The only exception to this is if the spear arm model was engaged in a fight, though not supporting, alongside a friendly hero model who successfully declared a heroic combat. In which case, after moving as part of the heroic combat, the spear arm model could provide support in the second combat. So basically, if you've supported already, you cannot support a second fight. But if you fought, you can move to support.
Yeah, if you fought in a heroic combat, you can support again later, which is I think how that's normally done.
That's how it's normally always been done, yeah. In what order are special strikes and shielding declared? This has always been a controversial one. I will shield if you have piercing strike, or you will piercing strike if I shield. During a duel roll, the player with priority gets the first opportunity to declare their model's special strikes, though they can choose to pass if they wish. The player without priority then gets the opportunity to declare their model special strikes. If they also pass, then the duel roll takes place and no further special strikes can be declared. If they opt to declare any special strikes, then their opponent may then choose to respond by declaring any special strikes if able. This continues until both players have finished declaring special strikes. It is important to note that once a model has declared a special strike of any kind, they cannot change their mind after an opposing model declares a special strike. Treat shielding as a special strike for the purposes of deciding the order that they are declared. Okay, so this finally clears it up for everybody. It's based on priority, and you get to pass or declare.
Wait, was this really like a big thing?
I mean, this was a massive thing on the internet many times, and never actually in practice.
Never resolved. All right.
Yeah, I mean, it would never come up in actual games.
Okay.
But,
yeah. All right. That's.
but the internet was always very loud about it.
But there was a shouting match online about
Yes.
it. Okay.
Next one. If a model has a special rule that allows specific friendly models, such as those with the required keywords or profile names, to count as in range of a banner, do those specific models have to be in range of the model with the special rule? Or do they just need to be involved in a fight that is in range of the model with a special rule? In these instances, it is important to remember that the model with the special rule is not actually a banner themselves. As a result, the models that count as in range of a banner must themselves be within range of the model with a special rule in order to benefit from it. Additionally, only the models that benefit from such a special rule may reroll a dice in the dual roll. So it is important to make a note of which dice can benefit and which ones cannot. So this is an interesting one, I think, because
I never had an issue with this. Like,
yeah, nor
I think that seems like the only way to like rule that, is that you measure to these specific models.
Yeah, but it was like if a model counted as being in range of a banner, then technically their whole fight has always counted in range of a banner.
Wasn't that changed already?
Wasn't it was, but
once like fixed.
Once they changed that, so all right, so they changed that with regular banners, and I think this is saying, but if you have a special rule that says it counts as a banner, it actually works differently, and you need to measure the individual figures.
Yeah.
These things irritate me to no end, where they have, I understand if you're going to create a rule and then you can say, all right, we meant it to work slightly differently than the way it actually was worded as written. That's fine if you want to do that. But then if you have like a parallel circumstance like this, when you say, but no, in this circumstance, it actually works the other way. That just annoys the heck out of me. So there's complexity with, there's complexity with a point that adds to the game, and then there's complexity for complexity's sake, and this is complexity for complexity's sake.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. This is annoying. I mean, I get it. I understand why they're saying it this way, but if you're gonna make one change to the intuitive way it would work, why not just change them both so that it works the same way?
Mm-hmm. I mean, the only time I think this really applies is for like Lake Down and Elves, where Lake Down are in range of the master supporting an elf, and then there is a tight combat against an Easterling or something like that.
Well, I mean,
if you're allying like fiefdoms into Gondor, or allying the Dragon Emperor into something, or taking the
Khand into Easterlings, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of circumstances, and there's like circumstances where I think the Mumak counts as a banner. I can't remember if it's just a banner for his own guys or whatever. So, and actually, yeah. All right, so I think the Mumak counts as a banner for everybody, right? Is that right?
Yeah, like Aragorn counts as a banner for everybody.
Right. So now you actually have this situation where if it was an actual banner, like say you've got Boromir of the White Tower with his banner. If he's within 6 inches of anybody in a fight, everybody in the fight can use the banner.
Yeah.
But if it's Aragorn who counts as a banner, counts as a 6-inch banner, then specific figures need to be within his 6 inches and only they can re-roll.
Yeah, but
Do I have that right?
yeah, but that's only going to be relevant if only one model of that fight is in combat.
Exactly, right. But
Because
you
because if
still
there are
need
two, you
to.
can always re-roll the other dice.
Well, no, because sometimes there are circumstances where like you each roll a 5 and you don't want to re-roll that 5.
Yeah,
You want to re-roll something else.
but I mean, if let's say you have two models fighting against one, if both of your models are going to be in, then it's irrelevant.
But if one is, then you need to differentiate the
If
dice. My
yes,
point is you've got
precisely. So it's only really relevant if there is one model in combat
right,
that you're in range of.
But that's the circumstance, right?
Yeah.
So you've got, like I said, if you swap out Boromir, the White Tower, and Aragorn, you need to actually worry about this difference.
Yeah.
And there's no gameplay reason why you should have to worry about that, right? I mean, all this is a trap for the unwary who happen to be playing Aragorn, and they don't differentiate. One guy's within 6 inches and the other guy isn't. They don't differentiate the dice, and he wants to go and re-roll his. He wants to re-roll his 4 instead of the 5 to try and get the 6, and the other player goes, "Oh no, sir! You did not designate which die that 5 was, so you cannot do it." I mean, and that's only an issue because the guy chose Aragorn rather than Boromir. That's what I mean by complexity for complexity's sake. All it is a trap, and those are the rules that really annoy me.
Yeah, so this change, or like this clarification, essentially just adds to as a negative play experience, because there is no reason for it.
Yeah, that's right. This is a rules change that makes the game less fun in certain circumstances, and doesn't add anything to the fun of the game. So why do it?
Yeah, it's like even if you had, like, let's say 6 models fighting against one, if 2 of your models were already in range, you'd be able to reroll the lower dice. If only one, then that might be the specific dice that you can reroll, but it happens to be your highest dice too.
Yeah. All right. So to go back to our previous segment on competitiveness, everybody out there, please, if you end up in this situation and somebody has played Aragorn rather than Boromir, and they have failed to designate which die was the die that was within 6 inches of Aragorn, let them just roll another die. On an odds, they can re-roll it because it was the one that was within 6 inches of Aragorn, and on an even, they can't. And just do it that way and figure out some way to deal with it. Don't wave this in your opponent's face and say that they're stuck because they failed to designate.
I mean, I would just tell them just re-roll whichever. Like,
or you could do that. That's fine. That's fine too.
It's probably not really gonna matter.
Yeah, which by the way is how I would have played it until I saw this thing. So that's also perfectly fine.
So another one: can a hero that is under the effects of the paralyzed magical power use might to affect their own roll to see if they recover at the end of the turn? Yes, as it states that might may be used to modify the roll. How is that an FAQ question? It tells you in the rule that you may use the points.
I don't know. Yes, because if you read the rule, it answers the question. I don't know. I don't know why they needed to expend time on that.
Who exactly can attempt to resist the tremor magical power? Only the initial target or any model under the line? The tremor magical power states that it will target the initial target and any model under the line. Therefore, either the initial target or any model under the line may attempt to resist it.
So this is a clarification. So this is a clarification to something that needed to be clarified, but it didn't actually answer the part that needed to be clarified. This answer restates the rule as written. However, what it doesn't answer is the question of if you're drawing a tremor line through a combat, can somebody else who is in the combat but not in the tremor line resist the power?
Well, they wouldn't be affected by the power, would they?
They would under the tremor spell.
Is the entire combat knocked over?
Yeah, the entire combat is knocked over. And I think the way that rule reads, then somebody who is in that combat gets to resist. I think that's the correct reading. I used to play it the other way, so it was kind of like the Sorceress Blast, where if you tremored somebody who didn't have will, somebody with will could get knocked over without resisting it. Then I went back and reread the rule, and I was like, well, that's not right. But that's the part that needed to get clarified, but that's not the part that they actually clarified. They just restated the rule here.
They sort of clarified it by saying it's any model under the line, not the model that's in combat with the model under the line.
Oh,
Whoa.
okay. So you were
Uh-oh.
saying, oh,
That makes things worse.
yeah, either the initial target or
Now,
any model.
do you follow the rules as written, or do you interpret this FAQ in a way that they probably didn't think you were going to interpret it, and then rule it the other way? This is just a flat out bad FAQ. This particular question, like, it just opens more holes in the rules rather than closing them.
I don't know. In this specific case, it says initial target or any model under the line. If you're in combat and your model is not under the line, then you don't get to resist.
So this is one of those circumstances, Mick, where I think your reading of this is perfectly fair. And I also think Evan is right that they did not intend this to mean that.
And yeah, it's probably not the best way of doing it this way.
So this may actually be something that needs to get posted up so that this gets brought to somebody's attention. Because but by the way, that if, Mick, your reading of this is the correct version, i.e. folks in combat don't get a chance to resist the tremor, it gets a huge boost.
I mean, that's kind of similar to
Grant did not need.
Yeah,
that's right.
But it's kind of similar to like models not being able to resist a sorcerer's blast if someone else gets.
It's exactly
targeted.
similar to that.
Yeah.
Borgir is never going to cast a different spell again.
Yeah. Well, you're right. It's exactly similar to that, Mick, except for the fact that all the models that are getting knocked down are taking strength 6 hits instead of strength 3 hits.
Yes.
You can hit multiple combats at the same time. So theoretically, you could knock over like 3 heroes on horses in separate combats at the same time.
You could.
Yes.
You could. But that's okay because we had to bring back the old Saruman and the old Sorcerer's Blast. But this is just another way of showing them.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, Mick. I will now be playing Borgir in every list I have going forward.
Well, it's not my fault. That's just what it says here.
Yeah.
By the way, do you mind purchasing a second Borgir and painting him up, Dad, so we can both play him in every single list we play for the rest of time?
No, because then you'd end up playing him against me when we have the inevitable Iverson off in round 3 or 4.
Oh, that's true. Just like proxy and a shaman or something, it'll be fine.
Proxies aren't allowed in games against each other.
I've never heard of that rule before.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Proxies aren't allowed in games against people from the same family.
Right. So
that one probably needs to get brought to somebody's attention because that's a problem.
Cool. Yeah. So the next FAQ is does the Assault on Lothlorien Legendary Legion, is it allowed to be used in tournaments? And the answer is no. So that's nothing really controversial. Then do models have to be on the board to be able to use special rules? Yes.
For folks who are not looking at the screen, Mick did just make that up.
Oh, but I thought that was the thing that everybody was expecting.
For 5 seconds, I went through a phase of intense bliss until I actually read what was on the screen, and then I was very disappointed.
Well, for about 5 seconds, I went through a period of intense trying to read what's on the screen, going, "Where the hell is that?" But all right.
Well, that's what everybody was expecting, right?
Yeah. Moving on.
Complete ban.
Well, no, I mean, what they did was they just changed Tremor so that the Legion of the Dragon Emperor can just dominate Assault on Lothlorien with
now people are just going to take 3 Borgirs and kill the entire army on their own.
Yep.
Yeah. Although that does make me want to start using those Black Shield Shamans again. Yeah. Okay, so do models have to be on the board to be able to special rules? Well, yes. Unless the special rule only works when the model is off the board. Surprise, surprise. Do inanimate objects such as a siege engine, demolition charge, mirror gallery, blah blah blah, count as terrain for the purpose of the stock unseen special rule? And that is yes. So you can now hide behind the mirror Galadriel if you have an elven cloak.
Oh, it's covered. Can we
I'm
back up
just
to the one before for a second?
The models have to be on the board to be able to use special rules.
So I confess I had thought. All right, so this is the way I used to play Madril or Madril, however you want to pronounce
so
it.
I don't think they stated this. I think so. The rule works for Madril off the board,
Ah, yes,
just for
it
Madril
doesn't
when
work
he's
Right.
off
for
the
Okay.
board.
rules. Yeah.
I don't.
But you,
I think this was just worded very poorly.
yeah. Okay. All right. I get it. It's not like you can now bring Madril on last, and everybody else gets his bonus.
It's not like when Madril shows up on the board, the special rule stops working. It's just that
Well,
he gets it
no.
for himself when he's off the board.
So I had always interpreted it differently. I always brought like Madril or at least Guritz on first. He would get his own +1. But then once he was on the board, everybody who came on after him would get the +1. Is
Well,
this saying that you can now
that's
bring
still the
Guritz on
case.
last?
No, because the rule still allows you to only give +1 when you're already on the board, no?
Well, this is saying the opposite. This is saying it's a special rule that only works unless special rule only works when the model is off the board.
I might
Oh,
just have a read of that.
oh God, wait a minute. So this is even
Yeah, that was what I was saying, Dad, where it's like, oh, when Madril shows up on the board, his special rule doesn't work now, which I don't think is how they meant to say that, but that is certainly how they said that in the FAQ.
No. So like, okay, in scenarios where you roll for additional forces, you may modify the reinforcement roll for Madril's warband by +1 or -1. So when he is off the board, you can modify his own roll to
right.
become a +1 or -1.
Yes.
Then the rule says if Madril is already on the board,
Okay. All right.
then all
All right.
warbands from this
Yeah,
army may also modify.
the special rule is so specific that it's able to not fall under the same issue with rampant misinterpretation that a lot of these other questions have. But yeah, it's
So
definitely worded pretty poorly in the answer.
I think it applies more to something like Gift of Foresight. So
Yes, I think that was what it was supposed to
yeah,
be
so
for.
if Elrond is off the board, can you modify your priority rolls? And the answer would be
Right.
no.
Right. Which I think had its own FAQ at one point, but maybe I'm wrong about that. All right.
Yep.
Okay.
And
all right.
that's it. Oh yeah, and obviously Assault on Lothlorien also something else, but I'm not even gonna bother with reading that one. So
All right. Is that the last of them or are there any more?
that is the last of them.
All right.
That was fun.
That is the last of us.
Yep.
Last of our FAQs.
All right.
As a general reaction, what are people's reactions to this FAQ? Because in my personal opinion, I feel like this was a huge nothing burger. Because
I think the changes to Tremor have changed the game for everybody that uses Burger.
yeah, I think the unintentional changes, yes. I think the unintentional changes to Tremor had more of an impact than any other rule in this FAQ.
Yeah,
Yep.
I think that's why
Oh,
you're
did we
not.
go over the fact that Galadrim Knights now have hand and a half swords?
We did.
We
They
did, yeah.
did. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
It was momentous. So momentous you didn't
Yeah.
even realize that
Yeah,
they could set it.
sadly, that is also probably one of the biggest changes in this FAQ. That Galadrim Knights can go two-handed now, and they are probably never going to do that. So that just sort of shows you just how completely pointless this FAQ feels. But that's just my opinion. I feel like this could have not existed, and the game would have been exactly the same.
Well, unless you were playing Aragorn, in which case now you
Yes.
need to make sure that you're designating dice for guys that are within 6 inches.
Or Master of Lake Town. So you're not re-rolling your elf dice.
Right.
To be fair,
Well, but everybody
Aragorn's
did
banner
that.
affects every model,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's fine.
Yeah. But everybody did that. Now you need to worry about Aragorn. All right, everybody. This has been another episode of an Unexpected Podcast. We will talk to you again soon. Bye, everybody.